Good evening, good evening, good evening. Good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode number 816. 816. This is for September the 6th, 2021. It's a Labor Day special. You didn't think we'd be on the air this week on time. Well, we are. In fact, we're an hour early for those that are watching live. We typically start the show at 8 o'clock Central. Tonight, we're starting at 7 o'clock Central. It's an early start. That means we can just talk all night here. So welcome. This is the time of the program where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say, on occasion, very outrageous things. Hopefully you've had a quiet, peaceful holiday weekend. We've had no major hurricanes for a while, which is good this weekend. You know, we've had multiple weekends with big hurricanes. We don't have that problem right now, which we're very blessed. We got the embed code going in here, and let's bring on the show panelists. Do we dare? Going to be an interesting show tonight. I get the idea. Last week's was just great. If you missed last week's show, you need to go back and watch or listen to that one, because it was good. Let's see, I think everybody might be here, except Jen. I think she is out this week, but hopefully everybody else will be here, but we'll see. So I don't think we have, looking at the, ABC has had college football the past couple of nights. I think the college football game tonight is over on ESPN, which means we'll be getting on time tonight. I think it's Ole Miss in Louisville. But if you're into college football, and we know that most people are not, I think sometimes we go down that rat hole. We talk too much about college football on the show here. But if you're into it, hopefully your team won. Most people know that I'm a Mississippi State guy, and that was slightly embarrassing. So State played Louisiana Tech. And they almost got beat. State had a 20-point fourth quarter comeback to pull that one out. So, but a win is a win is a win is a win is a win. Isn't that right, Bill? A win is a win is a win.
Nah, I win by 40.
Oh, brother.
What's the Ole Miss Louisville game would be very interesting tonight. It would be even more interesting if Lane Kiffin were able to coach. Did you see Mackenzie Milton for Florida State, James?
No.
Do you remember that gruesome injury he had? He broke something serious, leg, knee combination, damaged his artery. But that happened in 2017, I think. He came back and played in that Florida State Notre Dame game last night and was effective. And it was really heartwarming to see him get
good for him.
I know. I thought it was the feel-good story of the weekend.
Comeback stories are good. We need more feel-good stories.
We do. Hope we have some guests tonight. Oh, there's Gary.
Oh, yeah. I think Jen is the only one I've heard from that says she would not be on the show tonight. So hopefully everybody else is back. Gary, can you hear us all right?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Perfect.
Loud and clear. What's the secret with all? What's the secret with the hair, man? It's like if I had hair that good looking, I'd be a good looking guy. I mean, what's the deal? I mean, how does this happen?
Darned if I know.
Gosh.
35-year career with the National Weather Service. That's probably what it did.
No, most people that have that career with the Weather Service, they pull their hair out. They look like me. But no, I've noticed a lot of Weather Service retirees have a full set of hair, a full head. Stefkovich got a lot of hair. Bill, Jim's looking good.
Brian Peters. That AFOS back in the days, it would have had some radiation leakage or something.
Brian Peters, he's got a full set of hair.
Yeah,
I mean,
does,
what's the deal with that?
What's the trick? Yeah.
Well, whatever it is, I need to try some of it.
Maybe nobody knows the show's at 7 except us.
I'll be honest with you. I kind of forgot. I know that at some point that crossed the wire machine a few weeks ago, but in fact, I got on the tweeter and promoted it, and they immediately, hey man, you said it was going to be an hour earlier this week. It was going to be at 8 Eastern instead of 9 Eastern. You bonehead. So no, you're
There
right.
you go.
I raised my hand, but when you pull a boneheaded thing, you have to raise your hand. So. But I don't think that football game's on ABC tonight, so I think we get on time, which yeah,
it's on ESPN. That's right.
Okay, but apparently the Florida State Notre Dame game was overtime last night.
Yeah, it went to one overtime, and then terrible things happened. The Florida State lined up. Well, Mackenzie Milton threw an incomplete pass, but the referee ruled it was a fumble. And so they moved it all the way back to like the 31-yard line or the 33-yard line. And it was going to be a 50-yard field goal. Well, the kid out there goes out. They start the play, but Florida State calls timeout. So he kicks the field goal perfectly. And so they go back and look at it and they say, no, it was an incomplete pass. So they move it back to the 20, and he misses the field goal from the 20. And so all Notre Dame had to do was go down and hit a chip shot field goal. It was a good game. Troy Kimmel.
Hey.
The clutter index is increasing. That's a good sign.
Yeah, the cluttering. The McDonald's hamburgers are here again tonight. So making a last minute run.
Gary, we're coming to watch a Phillies game next summer.
Oh, no, that'd be awesome. I want to go down.
My old co-anchor sports guy, Scott Palmer, worked for Channel 6, WPVI for years, and then he left to go to work for the Phillies. And we had a little reunion here this summer. He said, I'll fix you up. So next summer we're coming to see the Phillies.
Get a picture with the Philly fanatic, James.
We will.
Yeah.
And what's the Flyers mascot who's so funny? What's his name?
Gritty?
Yeah, Gritty. You need to get a picture with Gritty, James.
I don't think I know. What's his name? Gritty?
Gritty. Yeah.
Just look him up on the internet.
He's got a full head of hair. That's for sure.
No.
He looks slightly insane.
So do I. I'll fit right in. Do we need to do anything else? We can get started. We got all kind of stuff to talk about here.
I know. I'm kind of disappointed though that Josh is not here because this is his show. Maybe
it's like
1 a.m. over there. Yeah,
I'm about to say it's late night, early morning, or something. So hopefully he'll join us once we get started. So the four of us, we can.
Yeah, we go on.
Four all cranks. We can go on all night here. Talk about this situation in the flood.
Well, he says he's ready,
Ida.
but he didn't get the Zoom invite. I'll send it again. That's weird. I don't have WhatsApp. Do you have WhatsApp on your phone, James?
That's some kind of
Chinese intelligence tool or something.
No, it's like we have a tennis group and they use that, but I just get the text messages. I don't even know what that app is. I mean,
it's an encrypted thing, I think. But I have to agree with Bill. It's I've been told that it's very suspicious. So.
All right. Well, let's get this thing going. I mean, since he's across the pond here, we'll wait about 30 more seconds. I want to be sure his audio and video are clean before we start the recording.
We did it. We had a clean test, so it went well, but you never know.
That's true.
I can WhatsApp him, but I don't know how to WhatsApp, so I just can't do that. I guess I do have WhatsApp. I have a Chinese intelligence tool on my phone. Well, I'll be darned.
I think half the apps we have are Chinese intelligence. I have TikTok. Are you guys on TikTok?
No.
I don't know. Your phone number is no longer registered with WhatsApp. Oh, okay.
Hey, Gary, are you on TikTok?
I am not. So Twitter's about as racy as I get. That's more than enough for me.
Well, you rock Twitter, Gary, so that's all you need.
You own Twitter. You don't need no stinking TikTok. But gosh, it's like I'll do a little update on the hurricane over there, and it'll rack up 500,000 views within 12 hours. I'm thinking, this is nuts. I mean, who are these people and where are they? But they're all, it's apparently very young. It skews very young demographics over there. But I don't do funny, creative stuff like Troy. Troy's funny. I'm not funny. I mean, I am not funny.
I'm like Gary. I kind of stick with one thing, and I kind of stick with the Twitter box. So
you're an influencer, James.
Right. I have to live in all these different worlds to reach the different demos.
And unfortunately, James, I'm more of an insulter. So,
yeah, influencer, insulter. I like it.
Aggravator.
There's a fine
aggravator.
Line. There's a fine line between those two.
There is, Gary. Very good point.
Just sent it via my WeatherBrains email address, just because maybe sometimes my AT&T email address gets filtered out.
If you drop his email address in the chat, I can do that from my end. Just I use Gmail. Maybe he'll get that, and then we'll get started. We will light this candle. Okay. All right. I've got it. So hang on. All right. Let's invite via email. And he is now officially invited. All right. Let's get this thing cranking here. We got things to talk about.
Yes,
it's going to be a good show. All right. Here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
Kind of a big deal. Yes, we are. WeatherBrains episode number 816 for the 6th of September, 2021. This is the weekly show that's all about weather. We've had so much weather to talk about. Ooh, Troy, from the looks of things, it looks like you're starting to kind of get settled in, huh?
Yeah, slowly but surely it's happening. And I'm hoping to have the contractor out of here by the end of next week. So that's good news. And getting settled back in following the winter storm. It only took 6 months. So
when exactly was that winter storm? It was in
it was the night of Valentine's Day. It was the 14th of February, 15th, and then this place flooded 2 days later because of pipes overhead, which have all been replaced with PEX pipe now. But bottom line, everything kind of let loose in the roof here. And that was the beginning of my 6-month stay at the Hilton Homewood Sweets.
So what is the one thing you've missed from the Homewood Sweets by Hilton? Is there anything at all that you've missed?
Well,
the waffles.
The waffles are nice.
No, they don't have waffles.
They put them back for Troy.
They do have waffles now, and that's why I got this. But I tell you, be honest with you, and Bill will tell you this, but it probably was more the people. And, I got tired of it. In 6 months, you get tired of it, but I love the people over there, and the pancakes weren't half bad. I mean, the waffles weren't half bad.
That's the Holiday Inn Express, Troy, the pancakes.
I know.
Well, I'm just glad to hear the waffle
there
machines
too for
back.
like a week, if I remember correctly.
But we have a Homewood Sweets by Hilton next door here.
Well, I know, because y'all have an open invite all the time. James, you can go over there and fatten up a little bit for us.
They are very courteous. They say if you ever work an all-night severe weather event, winter storm event, whatever, just come over and have breakfast with us. And I'm glad to know the waffle machine is back. That's like slightly awesome.
Yep.
So Bill Murray, is this waffle deal back at all hotels, or is this just a select few?
It's supposed to be, but that doesn't mean everybody's quite on the bandwagon with it
Well,
again yet.
It will be. It will be, Bill. I've learned a lot about the hotel business. It will be after the first inspections begin to happen again.
Hey, well, I'm afraid you just nailed it there, Troy.
Big with inspections. So
well, those inspections are coming back. They're back in person now. So yeah, we got that to all look forward to.
All right. Well, Bill, let's bring in Gary here. We got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, well, Gary, you got promoted right to the front of the show there. We were going to have you be a panelist with our documentarian guest tonight, but we're glad you're here. Gary's been a crazy 10 days. 1 week ago tonight, we were sitting here talking about, Hurricane Ida and what an impact it was going to have in the Northeast. Seemed to be a really good prediction, from the WPC. Seemed like all the local forecasts were good. And now still we've got over 60 fatalities. Talk about what in the heck happened.
Yeah, well, it's, I'm still kind of in shock even with regards to, how many people we lost. No matter how good the forecast is, you still are looking at going, what happened. And it's hard for me to tell you exactly what happened. It seemed like, from a human nature standpoint, the tornado threat, which rapidly kind of escalated that day, really sucked up a lot of meteorological oxygen in the room. It went to the tornadoes. There was some incredibly, in near real time, some incredible videos, in South Jersey, and so for a period of time that really kind of pulled the attention that way. But backing up further, I would just say that leading up to the event, even though I think the weather, National Weather Service offices did a good job, I think I don't think there was a lot of disagreement. I think the broadcast media, I think private sector, we're all kind of on the same page. I would say very positive things about WPC. I think the fact that they escalated to a high risk on day 2 with the excessive rain caught a lot of people's attention. I saw some people posting statistics, and I don't have them here in front of me. I should, but basically there's an alarming amount of damage and fatalities associated with those high risks. They really do capture the bulk of the issues with regards to both life and property. So that worked. New Jersey's governor did, declared a state of emergency, I think, even before the first real raindrops fell. So, he went early and rightfully so. But nonetheless, there wasn't a lot of, I didn't see a lot of people altering their routines, even though I had mentioned that I had actually been doing some write-ups, doing like a daily weather forecast for Philadelphia. And back on Monday, I was writing up the forecast for Tuesday, and I was saying, Tuesday's a day, if you're going to be out and about at all, you're not going to want to be out and about on Wednesday. Run your errands on Tuesday, do whatever you got to do on Tuesday. If you don't have to be outside on Wednesday, because if you're out, there's going to be heavy rain, there's going to be flooding, you're going to have to be very careful with travel. It was considerably worse than that, but even on Monday morning when I was writing the forecast for Tuesday, I already know that Wednesday was not going to be a very good day at all. So for me, personally, the light bulb came on when I saw this, when the heavy rain was still back really over southwest and south central Pennsylvania. And there was an uncontrolled release from a dam on the river where Johnstown, Pennsylvania is. And I think in most parts of the country, if you're in the weather business, you know about Johnstown, but around here, kind of like, the hairs on the back of my neck came up when I saw that. I said, I don't like uncontrolled releases from dams as a general rule. If it's associated with Johnstown, that's like, two black cats crossing your path at the same time. It's like, so for me, from then on, I was like, top level alert. I was like, this is going to be really bad. And then it turned out to be really bad over the next 6 to 10 hours. Why that evaded, you saw my commentary, why all that 2 days worth of beating the drums about heavy rain, and why watching, uncontrolled releases from dams in, southwestern Pennsylvania, followed by water rescues west of Philadelphia, and then into Philadelphia, and then it moves into New Jersey, and then it gets to New York City, and they're shocked, absolutely shocked that they're going to wound up with record rainfall and catastrophic flash flooding. So, that part continues to irritate me. But I will say that, I didn't see a lot of, going back to a point I made and then kind of left. I didn't see a lot of people altering their day-to-day routine, even though it was suggested that they do so. No one was sort of shutting things down, because we typically don't do that for heavy rain events in this neck of the woods. If it had been, 12 inches of snow, there would have been a lot of, hey, we're shutting things down early, or, be prepared for travel restrictions, or the subways will be shutting down. There's a bunch of stuff we do. And that was one of the discussions. I wound up, as you may know, I wound up on CNBC doing an interview on Friday evening. And one of the things I was asked, and that I agree with, is what do we need to be doing differently? I think heavy rain seems to be heavier than it ever was, or at least within recorded history up here in the Northeast. We've got so much impervious surface that I think we may need to consider, when there's really heavy rain in the forecast, to start altering some behaviors by actually restricting some of the mass transit, trying to encourage people to actually get off the roads in advance. I don't know, again, about complete travel bans, but just this idea. I didn't see any press conferences or anything telling people, hey, you really want to get off the roads before this heavy rain comes in. Try to wrap things up in the next hour or two and try to get home or get to wherever you are, and then stay safe, in that location while the heavy rain moves through. So, in retrospect, there's more that we could do, but I think it's more on the political side, more on the societal behavioral change side, as opposed to, I don't know exactly, unless we want to start warning every time there's heavy rain, talk about the potential for it to be a record, which say to be like kind of what the mayor of New York City needed, and that's not going to happen. So I will point out, again, I've talked about this, but like in the I forget now who it was, but someone on Twitter, on my Twitter feed, was like doing some, commenting on my tweet storm, and they mentioned that, even with just 3 to 6 inches of rain in the area forecast discussion from the New York City office prior to the event, 6 inches of rain in a 24-hour period would be a top 5 flood event for Central Park. So basically, they're basically told, the morning of the day it rained, you're going to get a top 5, rainfall event. So torrential rainfall is mentioned in the AFD, and the focus is on the late afternoon into evening and nighttime hours. So they got a top 5 rain event, and with torrential rainfall in the late afternoon into the evening hours. So it's hard for me to direct. I'm sure the New York office and other weather service offices are looking at how they could have phrased it differently. That seems to be kind of the way we are. But I'm of the opinion right now that the New York City mayor and the new New York governor, who I don't know, I think they must train them on how to blame the weather forecaster before they can assume office. There must be some orientation training to do, because she hasn't been governor for more than a week or two. And she was hot out of the box with, hey, this is way more, heavens opened, and there was more rain than anyone ever told us was coming, blah, blah, blah,
And that, Gary, is kind of my question for you. If we really want to know how successful this was, we look for the people that tell us that it was a surprise. Now, coming from a politician, for them to say that's just a sign of ignorance. And that's Troy saying that, by the way, not Gary, anybody else. That's just ignorance. But I heard no one say anything about this being a huge surprise, except for the politicians. And I'll refer back to my earlier statement. I heard nothing about surprises here.
I don't know, Troy. I saw a lot of this in the media.
Oh, really?
I'll try and give you one example here. This is just
there
one
you go.
example.
I hadn't seen this.
Yeah, it was a meme that was, to me, it permeated a lot of the media, and I'm not talking, meteorologists, but journalists. This is northjersey.com, and for those that are listening, the headline says, New York City reels from surprise flooding and drowning deaths.
Let's look back at what Gary just said. He said 6 inches of rain in 20. I don't know what people expect from. I think it's easy to blame meteorologists, and I hate to say this, sorry y'all, but media, and I'm not talking about meteorologists, but media and politicians. Let's just go ahead and cram that in that box I just created just a second ago. I don't know. I'm tired of that surprise stuff. And just because you're not willing to invest the time to know to be situationally aware, Gary. Just because you're not willing to do that does not make this a surprise.
Yeah, and in my comments, and I tried to do that on Twitter, but I'm trying to differentiate in part because I've been kind of, trying to be more aware of social science, really almost over the past decade since leading up really with Sandy, which was back in 2012. And and it used to, one of my second duty station with the National Weather Service was Oklahoma City, and it used to irritate me and the other forecasters when we'd actually, back then, getting a warning out in advance of the tornado was obviously the goal. And sometimes it happened and sometimes it didn't. The Doppler radar wasn't quite there yet. And so using what we had, it was the state of the art. You sometimes did get the warnings out in advance and sometimes you didn't. It was very irritating to us when we get a warning out with maybe even like 10, 15, 20 minutes lead time. It would hit a town. And unfortunately, it would have major impacts. And people would say it struck without warning. Now later in life, I realized they weren't aware of it. So for them, it struck without warning. They weren't all just listening to know where the radio or gathered around a TV that had a crawl, or the meteorologist is breaking in saying, hey, there's a tornado. I understand people have lives to live. So, and they're not tuned in. So I'm not, if members of the general public want to say, hey, I was really surprised by how bad the rain was and how bad the flooding was last week, I pretty much let that go. I might ask them, what did you think was going to happen, or how, what did the weather forecast even register? I'm always curious to hear what they have to say. But the key decision makers, the political leaders, the mayor and the governor, they're getting briefed. They're not John or Jane Q. public. They're getting briefings from the National Weather Service either directly or via their emergency management. I know how that works. I know what I did. There was many more than one briefing I did, where the governor of New Jersey or governor of Delaware was on the phone with me when I was with the National Weather Service in Mount Holly. So I know how that works. So they should have known better. And again, if they were really going to be this upset about what happened, what they should have been doing 6 hours or 8, 10 hours before the worst of the weather arrived is had a press conference, have something where they talk about, okay, we gotta be prepared for this to be really bad. We thought it was going to be this, but now we see we're looking off to our west and we see what's happening, and now we realize it's going to be worse. And we don't have a lot of time, but we're going to use the time we got, and here's what we recommend. And then off you go with some recommendations and some plans. They didn't do any of that I can tell. They did have press conferences about the upcoming storm, but they kind of again Mayor de Blasio sort of my target of complaints now. He somehow thought they were going to get 6 inches of rain, and it was going to be he talked about how it's going to be evenly spread over a 24-hour period so they could handle that. I've never in my life heard of a 6-inch rainfall that kind of conveniently spreads itself out over a 24-hour period. There was just he seemed to kind of like, he basically came up with a weather scenario that would never happen. And instead of planning for getting the bulk of that 6 inches of rain when it occurred, he made this incredibly convenient assumption that 6 inches of rain would spread out over 24 hours and would not cause any problems of any significance. So I can't, that's really stupid. That's really kind of industrial strength stupid. That's like nothing. No one in the weather business told him that. If I have to retract that, I need evidence. I believe that he just heard something and made an incredibly convenient assumption about how that was going to play out. I cannot believe anybody from the New York National Weather Service office briefed him that 6 inches of rain were going to occur over evenly spaced, no variations whatsoever over a 24-hour period. That would be, I don't believe such a meteorological phenomenon exists.
Well, we just got our show title.
Yeah, industrial strength stupid. There's
I like
no
that
doubt that is the show title right there. Yeah,
Gary, that's a great one. I'd like to use that.
Print it now. Gary, go ahead, Jen.
I was just going to say, I'm trying to piece all this together. The quote I saw, you had Representative Ocasio-Cortez and the mayor, and the quote was, "We needed more advance notice from the National Weather Service." Just over and over, you're seeing this stuff where they're blaming the Weather Service. And, and again, it gets a little touchy because they blame it on climate change, and it gets into this political stuff, but it's got to just be frustrating. And I could hear it in your voice when you did the CNBC piece, and I could almost hear you reading those tweets. And what can we do? And it's easy just to say, well, these politicians are, imbeciles or whatever, but we have to learn to work with them. I mean, what do you do here? I mean, what's the next step to try and repair? Something is broken here. Are they just all, people of industrial strength stupidity, or where do we go from here, Gary?
Well, I'll say that, I think, again, in terms of, if you really believe that what was going to happen with the weather forecast, the 6 inches completely, spread out perfectly evenly over a 24-hour period, that is industrial strength stupid. That's just not, from a weather standpoint, that's just makes no sense whatsoever. But I do think actually politicians are smart, the ones that survive and prosper. And this was in part of my tweet storm, was that they have conveniently, learned that that blaming the forecast is a great get out of trouble free card. Whenever you wander into a natural hazards penalty box, you want to get out, blame the weather forecast. That has worked in the past. And I think, to answer your question, James, it has to stop working. And that was my intent with the commentary. I didn't intend to wind up on CNBC, but as far as tweeting, I'm just like, no, I'm fed up. That's a lie. That's just complete nonsense what you just said. Yeah. And no, it's not the job of the National Weather Service to spoon feed you. It's the job to prepare you for what can happen, and to be prepared for what I would call, again, back in my days when I was MIC at Mount Holly, the reasonable worst case scenario. Almost every emergency manager I worked with not only wanted to know what the most likely course of the weather was going to follow, but they also wanted to know if it goes off the rails in a bad way, if it goes worse than what you're forecasting, what can I reasonably prepare for? If you said you were going to get 4 inches of rain and that'd be minor to moderate river flooding, what's reasonably the worst? Could we get 6 inches? Could we get 8 inches? And at first, that was early in my career, that was hard to answer. And I told them that was a little hard. Ensemble forecasting was the great breakthrough. About 15, 20 years ago, we started to get some ensemble guidance for things like river flooding, for things like rainfall amounts. We started to see some things, and I could better answer emergency management questions about the reasonable worst case scenario. So I think, if we're briefing, what's going to happen, and then we also talk about what's reasonably could be expected if things got worse than what we're currently forecasting. We've done our jobs as meteorologists, as long as we're communicating it using words that don't confuse or muddle the situation, which has been a problem historically, but I think the weather enterprise has gotten a lot better with that. We understand now that if you want people to understand the impacts, you gotta say it in a way that they can understand what you're trying to get across. So then, as far as politicians, my advice to politicians is simple. If you're going to criticize the weather forecast, my advice is this: pick a bad weather forecast. They still exist. They're harder to find. We've gotten a lot better over the arc of my career. I get just a little overwhelmed at times when I think what we could do when I retired versus what it was like when I first joined the Weather Service. So there are still bad weather forecasts, but a lot fewer than there were, say, 30 years ago. So just pick one of those. I'll bite I'll grind my teeth a little bit, but if it's actually a bad weather forecast, you can criticize it. That's part of what I would consider fair treatment. But this business of criticizing forecasts that were very good or excellent and saying that's still not enough, that's like I said, they've contracted out with the Tulane University social media club and providing advice, because apparently Tulane now needs hurricane tracks within plus or minus 20 miles of accuracy. that was a little interesting too. So it seems to be kind of a problem at both ends of the Ida's track, both at the beginning and at the end of the track when it was over land. We had some people who had a hard time understanding forecasts and impacts. But well, James, I think holding politicians responsible. That's when they get out of line. That's what it comes down to. And how we do that is still up for debate. But
well, I see, James, I mean, you didn't ask my opinion, but I'm going to give it anyway. That I don't know that we can resolve this problem right now. This country is so divided down the middle. I have people tell me the sun rises in the west, and by God, if you argue with them, then, you know, they call you every name in the book. And I just don't think we can get to the point right now. I think it will be impossible until more critical thinking comes into play. You know, my saying, I believe that we're short on critical thinking these days, and we do a lot of emotional thinking. And I agree with Gary a whole lot when he says, and you see this, it is so easy to blame meteorologists. And frankly, Gary, I wonder at this point, it's not time for, damn it, for meteorologists to start standing up for themselves. Mm-hmm. We never have been. And I've criticized the National Weather Service for years at headquarters. I love Louis and I love the people up at headquarters, but they do not stand up like they should for themselves in Washington, for what they do and for the amount of money they take from taxpayers every year to do it. They do a heck of a job. And by God, stand up for the men and women of the National Weather Service. And you know what? I say stand up, meteorologists, for your forecast. And if a politician says it's a surprise and it's not, call them out on it.
Right. And my problem, you know, we all fight this battle. I mean, we fight it with politicians and news people. Yep. It's just they're programmed to say, we didn't know it was coming. It struck without warning. You know, it's the same old line every time.
Well, it's sexy.
People say, why don't you just let it go? Why don't you just let it go? Well, here's the problem. It discredits everything we do. It discredits everything we do. So if Diane Sawyer gets on television on ABC's World News Tonight and says, rare Alabama tornado strikes without warning, then people just assume, well, these morons, you know, can't provide warning. They don't know what they're doing. You know, they are inept. They should be replaced. You know, it totally discredits the entire system. And I'm not just talking, you know, broadcasters. I'm talking the Weather Service and emergency managers, the entire integrated warning team. And unless we come in and defend ourselves and set the record straight, we're going to have a problem here with credibility. And
I would contend, James, that we have a problem.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And
well, I was in your news director's office the day after you took her to task for that, James, and that was pretty funny because ABC News was on the phone and they wanted to talk about getting your boy to stand down. And, the GM was like, this guy, you can't tell him to stand down. He'll tweak his suspenders or something at you, and something bad will happen.
But you know, I would look at now, and I will say that the reporter, not Diane Sawyer, I don't care about. You know, I don't want an apology. I just want it to set straight. The reporter called and apologized. He said, I am so sorry. And they came back and they did a story the next night on weather radio and the timing of the warning and how good it was and blah, blah, blah. They never said they were sorry or they goofed up, but at least to their credit, they did that. And often when you do challenge them, especially in the journalism world, they will come back and try and set it straight, or at least I found that to be true. Now, the politicians, I don't know. But, you know, and why, you know, think about all of these historic events over the years. You know, you go back to Donna and Agnes, and this ain't the first time this has happened.
Sandy, we were doing a special show 9 years ago, the night that water was pouring down the subway steps, and I thought it was the end of the world. And I had a premonition last Monday night, you know, please don't let that happen again. And sure enough, I wake up the morning after the storm and there's water pouring down the subway. Not pouring down. It looked like Niagara Falls coming into the subway station there in Manhattan. But to me, the heartbreaking thing were all those people that lost their lives in the basement apartments. That was just, you know, that was heartbreaking to see that.
And right. And that's you know, forget these jabronis. I mean, you know, forget them. The bottom line is the people that we serve. And we had loss of life. And I wish Kim could not be on the show tonight, but I wish Kim was here to talk about the social science side of this, because I think Gary's right. To my knowledge, nobody did anything in New York City, in any borough before this happened, at least on a mass scale, to prepare for this. They just, you know, they just seemed going about their business, and it just kind of happened. Somehow all of these flash flood watches and flash flood warnings and high risks and flash flood emergencies. It just kind of went over their head until their basement was full, or they were flooding away, or their car was being washed away. And what else can we do to communicate this? And I will say, and again, I am not criticizing anybody, and I wish Nate was here, because let me share this. I noticed a lot of communication from people that said the local TV stations were really skittish about interrupting programming during this whole event. And this is a piece for those listening that says New York stations dropped the ball of flooding. And this was an email that was sent to this media blog. Almost no live coverage from 8 until 11 p.m. when the flooding began. Virtually zero primetime interruptions, save for a tornado warning in the Bronx. And only WCBS stayed on past 11:35 as the flooding intensified. TV stations abandoned viewers and had a declaration of duty last night. This was written the day after. We are responsible for the countless lives lost because we did not do our FCC mandated jobs. Putting summer reruns ahead of life-saving alerts in some cases. As a Texan, I'm appalled, heartbroken, angry, and dismayed at what I saw last night. This was preventable. And again, I don't know anything about. I've seen this though in multiple places. Do we know how the TV stations performed in New York City? Anybody? I mean,
I do not. No,
I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have Nate on to talk about that.
Yeah, because Nate is over, all the NBC channels, and I've noticed that it just seems to me like the larger the market, they're more skittish about cutting off whatever's on the network, because typically they're network O&Os. They're owned and operated by ABC, CBS, NBC, or Fox. And I don't know if it's some mandate they have where they can't cut off programming or go wall to wall, but goodness gracious, I'd be balls to the wall here. I mean, if this was happening in my market, I don't care. I don't care if Alabama and Auburn was on television. I mean, I would be wall to wall with weather coverage, because this is life threatening. I mean, you got people that are losing their life, and you leave what's on TV, some freak of the week, women who name their butt cheeks or whatever these freak shows are. Who's watching this stuff anyway?
I saw that show once.
This is the only thing. And I did cut off. I did cut off that show for a tornado warning. The reason I keep bringing that, but it was Ricky Lake. And that was the topic of the day, was women who named their butt cheeks. I'm thinking, who in their right mind is watching this? But
you just
what
insulted about 30% of your audience.
Yeah, and then listen, and then let's be honest, okay? Can we just be honest here? I mean, who's watching linear television? Who watches? Oh, I'm going to be watching a show tonight on CBS at 8:30 in prime time. No, they're watching Netflix. And they're watching Hulu, and they're watching Amazon Prime, and they're watching YouTube, and they're watching all this streaming stuff. They're going to watch what they're going to watch on demand, and they're not watching local television. And if we just totally give it up, say, well, we're not going to do weather coverage because we might, interrupt, the 5 people watching us. I mean, goodness gracious, I don't understand that. And so we need to get Nate or somebody on to talk about that. And again, I hesitate to be critical because I don't know exactly what happened, but it sure seemed like the local stations in New York City just let it go. And I don't understand that. And that's another issue for another day, I guess. But I do want to talk about the tornadoes in Philadelphia, Gary, before we.
Yeah, that's getting to be a common thing with these tropical cyclones. Has that been always there, Gary, that we get these significant tornadoes right there in New Jersey when you got an older tropical cyclone moving up the Northeast?
It seems like a recent trend. I mean, we've had. With previous tropical cyclones, we've had I'd say the more typical weak tornadoes, when they come up here. I don't know why, if this is just kind of a fluke based on just a couple, data points. But, obviously we had much stronger tornadoes just last week. And that seems to be, I don't know if Mount Holly is leading the nation in tornado warnings, but it's certainly several standard deviations above where it would normally be, in terms of issuing tornado warnings and verifying them, so far this year. So having weak tornadoes with a tropical system, whether it's still named or not, even the remnants coming through, not unusual, I would say. having as strong tornadoes as we've seen here recently, that's been unusual. And why that is, I'm going to let the researchers work on that. So, I mean, I did see some, the vertical wind profile was extraordinarily impressive with Ida coming through, and exactly why it took on that, why it was that so much stronger, say, than other tropical systems that have come through in previous years, I can't say. So the only other thing I'll say is that we caught on during the I'd say the last maybe 8 to 10 years while I was MIC, we got more sensitive because we had a long running tornado kind of hotspot in southwestern Chester County, which is southwest of Philadelphia. And it turns out it's like just about due north of the Chesapeake Bay. So we have found that we get these surges of wind and moisture coming up both the Delaware Bay and the Chesapeake Bay, depending on sort of the wind orientation. And you can sort of turbocharge a thunderstorm with that kind of flow. It gets more spin, it gets more instability from the moisture. So the dew points overall were pretty high all around. I'm not sure how much difference there was compared to, coming off the Chesapeake Bay. But the flip side is this time of year, the Chesapeake Bay and the Delaware Bay are about as warm as they're going to be. So, water temperatures can easily be in the 80s, and you get flow off of those. And it does seem to help thunderstorm development and spin, so you get more tornadoes. So we have seen that. Whether that was whether the Delaware would have been the Delaware Bay would have been the main player. Though again, there was one actually back in the favored region, southwestern Chester County. There was one. I know the Weather Office verified one there. So there may be some contributions from the bays going on. And if those water temperatures are running warmer now than they used to be 10 or 20 years ago, because of climate, I'll say the phrase climate change. Then that could be contributing to this. I think it's a great area for more research. I can only speculate.
So Gary,
sorry, I was going to say real quick, Bill, one observation on the, the dissemination of tornado warnings. The local media, Gary, seemed really good at handling the tornado coverage. Something they don't do every day, but just as an observer, it sure looked like they performed very well. Don't you think?
I think so. Yeah, no, there's nothing I've seen to indicate they adjusted their coverage and were covering that very very aggressively. So a nice thing that's happened really this year now I've seen on several of these outbreaks after really, really big days. One or more of the broadcast meteorologists have gone on Twitter and publicly thanked the National Weather Service office in Mount Holly for doing such a stellar job. That was really a team effort, and but they couldn't do as well. The broadcast meteorologists couldn't do as well if they didn't have the National Weather Service in Mount Holly. So I think the Weather Office has stepped up its game in terms of the partnerships, working the relationships with the broadcast meteorologists, and in turn they've demonstrated now with a couple of events that they are capturing tornadoes and providing some significant lead time, which was historically a challenge. That was when I was there. That was certainly one of our biggest challenges was trying to get more lead time on tornado warnings. They have made clear progress, I'd say, over the last 5 to 8 years in doing that. So yeah, and the broadcast meteorologists have recognized that and have leveraged that. Yeah, I think they're more comfortable now breaking in and staying with the coverage because of that. So yeah, that part I think worked really well. I haven't really seen any critical comments about the broadcast meteorologists in general in the Philadelphia market. I think certainly the tornado coverage got a lot of attention, but I think that, they adjusted and we're dealing with the flooding. I can't say how much they were on top of it, but certainly it seems like they were covering it a lot as it was occurring.
Well, I just think for the Philadelphia and Mount Holly, that CWA and the Philadelphia DMA, the television market, it went well. And let me tell you what, you think this is easy, issuing tornado warnings at a weather service office and getting on television and communicating that. And for the emergency managers, this ain't easy. I mean, I think a lot of people think just any stooge, any buffoon can go down there at the Weather Service and, oh man, I'm going to see those reds and greens touching. I'm going to issue a tornado warning, and I'm going to be better than those guys. It doesn't work that way. There's a lot that goes into it. It ain't easy. And it flows into television, standing in front of that green wall for hours and hours at a time, working with so many different sources, and especially in a place like Philadelphia, they don't deal with it as much as we do down here in the Southern Plain states. This is what we do. It's kind of like us dealing with winter storms. And I just thought that, from what I saw in that market, the Weather Service, the TV, EMs, everybody did just a really good job. So, and I think that speaks well to the ground that you kind of plowed, Gary, during your years as the MIC there, in establishing those relationships. And it seems like you talked about, everybody's getting along, which I think you have to have that good relationship between all these partners for the warning process to be really, really successful. And you don't see that everywhere, but it looks like it's working there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it seems like a really professional relationship. It was that way when I was MIC. I think that's continued. And yeah, I have seen it behave differently. I mentioned earlier, when I was in Oklahoma City back in the 80s, there was some competition and some conflict between the National Weather Service office and some of the local TV stations. There was some that would do their own warnings and brag about beating the National Weather Service. So I'm happy to say that there hasn't been the slightest, nothing in that direction whatsoever in the Philadelphia market in the time I was here as MIC and since I retired.
So Gary, talk for a minute about, how the readiness is in New York City and the metro there, from what you can tell, in terms of another hurricane like Sandy, because it was, 9 years ago that we were talking about this, and, there's probably going to be additional ones, that are going to come along, could be this year even. How much more ready are northeastern cities for this sort of thing to happen?
The one advantage, that we have, it's a painful one, is that we went through Sandy, and there's a lot of people here who remember Sandy. There's the populations here, I'd say, are a little more stable. I mean, there is some movement. Some people leave, particularly retirement age, go down, say, North Carolina or Florida. But you don't, the populations are relatively stable. So you don't have, unlike some cities that have, tremendous population growth, and you've got a lot of people who've never seen, a hurricane, because they didn't live there 5 or 10 years ago. A lot of people here still remember Sandy, and we'll talk about it. I'm sure when the 10th anniversary comes around next year, there'll be even more sort of markers and discussion about that. How ready they are, it depends. Again, it just depends. To go back to what happened with Ida, it depends on how good people are at listening and understanding what's trying to be conveyed. I think what we didn't have during Sandy that we really, really needed was these storm surge inundation products. That was one of the things that was when the Sandy supplemental, I got used to saying that phrase a lot. There was a ton of money that came in, and there were a number of projects that were worked on, and one was to finally push. It had been moving along, and then it just kind of stopped or slowed down to a crawl because of a lack of funding, which was storm surge inundation mapping. Sandy showed the need for that and got it finally over the hump, and now we've got some maps to show people rather than just hey, this is a category 2 or a category 3, so here's some pre-developed map that you can use. But here's actually now to actually have storm-based inundation mapping, I think will be a huge benefit. The next time something like Sandy comes up this way, we just didn't have that last time around. So, but yeah, it comes down to and again, the Weather Service has things like Storm Ready and Weather Ready. And again, I say these recent behaviors, with Ida shows that, New York City's not really even, whether they actually are, a storm ready community or part of Weather Ready Nation, they're not really ready. If Ida and the forecasting for Ida threw them for a loop, they need to raise the level of their game. So it really does depend on how well they listen and how well they understood what they're being told. One of the other things with Sandy was that the year before we had Irene, and New York City really went full tilt and called evacuations and shut down a lot of things. And then they were a little underwhelmed with Irene. The surge was not as bad as forecast. It came in a little closer to low tide than was originally thought. And around here, changes in different parts of the coast, but around here, the difference between low tide and high tide is 6 feet. So the timing of a surge versus if it's going to synchronize with high tide is critical. Sandy, unfortunately, synchronized perfectly with high tide on the final high tide as the maximum surge came in. So that there's a lot of things that go on up here that elsewhere, other parts of the country where there's only a 2 or 3 foot difference between high and low tide, it doesn't make things quite as complicated. You don't have to be quite as fixated on exactly the timing of the tide cycle versus when the storm's going to make landfall. But up here, it's pretty critical to nailing what the final water level will be. So I think they have all the tools to be better prepared. They have some experience to help them be better prepared. But it will come down to the ability, but then again, I kind of dropped it. But, with Irene, they went kind of, I don't want to say they overreacted, but they were aggressive in their how they reacted to the forecast. And then with Sandy, there was a reluctance to act. There was almost this, they had to be almost dragged in to New York City in particular, seemed to really not want to, call things, even though it was looking pretty bad. So, but even here in New Jersey, I mean, you don't find out about things in real time, sort of as the event was approaching its maximum. I heard that, Governor Christie had called for all the barrier islands to evacuate. And I'm like, that's a good move. Yeah, you should. There was still some uncertainty exactly where Sandy was going to make landfall on the Jersey Shore. So it looked very certain it was going to make landfall somewhere on the Jersey Shore. So, but then later, afterwards, I found out that he called the evacuation because he was worried about the hurricane force winds. The fact that we were calling for like 8 to 10 feet of surge, which would put most any of the barrier islands underwater, and that there'd be waves on top wherever the worst of that came in, didn't seem to click, even though we were telling people that, and even though the emergency managers told us they understood that was really bad / most likely a record where the worst of that occurs. It didn't trigger the reaction I would have thought that it would have. And then especially considering, the year before with Irene, and at least with New York City, not so much New Jersey, but New York City, called these evacuations for Irene with more like 4 to 5 feet of surge. So it's always kind of interesting to see what people do with your weather forecast. I'm not interested in meteorologists taking on the responsibility to call evacuations, but there's Bill earlier was talking about sort of fearing that you're going to wake up and see water flowing into the subway with Ida, which you wound up doing, reminiscent of Sandy. And I could see there was actually a meteorologist who just got out of school within the past couple of years, who was active on Twitter, and he was tweeting away back when the heavy rain was still like west of Philly or over Philly, and he was like, I sure hope he's familiar with New York City. He says, I sure hope the MTA is doing something about the potential for flooding. And then like about 2 or 3 hours later, when New Jersey's getting crushed and New York City's turn is next, he's like, hey, MTA, now he's talking to MTA on Twitter, not that they're listening. Hey, you need to be doing something because you're going to get flooded. So, and then I don't think they did much of anything and they got flooded for Ida. So I'm reluctant to say that it'll definitely be better than it was during Sandy. I'll say it should be better than it was during Sandy because we have the Sandy experience, we have more tools. And I'd like to think we have a little, communication has gotten even better. But at the end of the day, it's not meteorologists making critical decisions that are going to define whether or not something was a success or failure.
So, Gary, have we cleared up all the issues about nomenclature and terminology and designations for the next hurricane that affects or maybe a post-tropical cyclone like Sandy technically was, I guess,
Yeah.
approaching that area.
Right. Yeah, I know that was kind of a big deal, and I actually probably made things, from some people's perspective, made things worse rather than better. But my position was, I kind of required the Hurricane Center, which they couldn't do, but I basically said, if you're going to call this a hurricane, keep it a hurricane all the way to landfall, because I do not want to be swapping pulling down hurricane warnings and raising, non-tropical high wind warnings for this thing 12 or 24 hours or 6 hours before landfall. And of course they weren't willing to do that. So they kind of went with it won't be a hurricane. It's not going to be, we don't think it's going to. I said, what do you think? Do you think it's going to be a hurricane or not be a hurricane when it gets to New Jersey? Well, we don't think it'll be a hurricane. It'll probably be post-tropical at that time. I said, then forecast that. We'll work with that. We'll use that. Now, that turned out a lot of people wanted to know where their hurricane was. So that maybe wasn't such a brilliant idea, but I was adamant about this. Let's not change labels right at a critical time, like right before it's making landfall would be in New Jersey would be my definition of a critical time. Now the Weather Service policy's changed. It was changed a year after Sandy, so they can keep going with hurricane warnings, which would have been ideal. That was my preferred solution, which the Hurricane Center couldn't promise because it would have bent or broke Weather Service policy. But I would have just been happy as a clam if they would have had hurricane warnings up all the way to landfall, and even technically it was no longer, it was a post-tropical cyclone when it made landfall, because it still hurts people's heads. It was a post-tropical cyclone with Category 1 hurricane force winds. It wasn't a tropical storm. It was a hurricane when it made landfall. It had hurricane force winds when it made landfall at Category 1 level, but it was a post-tropical cyclone. I still find people, 9 years later who say, well, at least it didn't have hurricane winds when it made landfall. Well, actually it did, but let's not even go that way. And then, let alone, I can't tell you, I had quite a number of angry phone calls post Sandy where people wanted to know why Sandy wasn't going to be considered a major hurricane, given all the impacts and all the damage it did. It was like, at that time, it was like the 5th costliest hurricane on record. And so I said, I told the person, you're going to hate it even more when I tell you it wasn't actually a hurricane when it made landfall. They're not even going to carry it as a hurricane. And if they didn't hang up on me then I said, but it's not a major hurricane because major is based on the wind speed, and we weren't even close. We were actually at the low end of Category 1. And if it had been a hurricane, that's where it would have been at. It wasn't even close to being a Category 3, which is what you need for a major hurricane. And that did actually trigger a number of people just hang up. That was just a bizarre, weather geeky, useless meteorologist kind of answer, to their inquiry as to why Sandy wasn't considered a major hurricane. So yeah, labeling is a very interesting thing. It was educational for me going back to Ida. I'll kind of beat Ida to the pulp here, but given again the poor performance from New York City on this, I would say that kind of convinced me, it's not just naming storms that gives people either better insight, they pay more attention to it. Because this thing everyone was calling it Ida, even though I guess it was maybe still a tropical depression at that time. It wasn't anything more than that. And people were calling it Ida, and they still dropped the ball. New York City dropped the ball. And so whether it was named or not was irrelevant, it seems to me, in terms of their preparation. But as far as this post-tropical stuff, or whether it's a hurricane, and then actually I talked to some of my counterparts, after the event up in New England, and they liked the change that occurred too, because for the weather offices up there, because it turns out Canadian Maritimes, they get hurricanes. And that was the policy that was adopted in 2013, whether it's technically still a hurricane or not. If it has hurricane force winds, it gets a hurricane warning. That's what the Canadian Met Service was doing, has been doing for a number of years, when the Weather Service wasn't doing it here in the States. So at least we also, up in the New England areas, the policy change brought us into alignment with Canada. So that made their life easier up there.
So Gary, it seems to me like the screaming message, though, that's kind of missed in all this is the thing I look to is that WPC high risk. That when that comes out, you're going to expect flooding, and somehow we've got to hit that harder. We have PDS tornado watches, should we, and even severe thunderstorm watches. Do you think we should have a a PDS flash flood watch? Is that something that we might need to consider, or is that just going to get lost in the shuffle?
I'd be willing to consider it. I heard some discussion. I saw, some people I respect, propose that on Twitter, on my Twitter feed in response to what I was tweeting. And then I saw some pushback saying, we don't have very good skill trying to do this with tornadoes. Why are we going to try to do this with flash flooding? I would say I'm up for that, in part because I didn't verify the statistics, and I have to go back and find this graphic. But if it's true, the WPC has significant skill with their high risk in terms of identifying high impact events that they capture both a lot of the property damage and a lot of the loss of life and injuries from flooding with these high risk events. So if we want to say, in these high risk situations, if you're going to go with a flash flood watch, think about going with a PDS, flash flood watch to further augment, the messaging. I'm not opposed to that. I know they can put. I mean, there's the flash flood emergency. When you get into the actual event, there's some different levels you can put in the flash flood warnings, and there's the flash flood emergency. But we really don't have anything that far in advance to kind of give them, heads up a day or two ahead of time. So I like to think that could make a difference. I don't know. I have some data points in the New York City area among the political leaders that I'm like, I'm not sure what, I don't know what they will do, with more, as I said in my tweets, if they're going to ignore good to great information, it doesn't really behoove the weather enterprise to spend a lot of time and energy piling up even more good to great information. They can just ignore that too, they're going to, at some point in time, communication. I've had this discussion multiple times in different scenarios. Sometimes I'd be talking as a supervisor, you have these not so fun discussions with employees who are sometimes have some room for improvement. Let's put it that way. And I had one person who would tell me, I'm a great communicator. I said, well, no, your communication is a two-way street, and the people who are getting your message are having trouble receiving it. So no, you cannot be, unilaterally declare yourself a great communicator. So I tried to make that point in the tweets that effective communication goes both ways. And if senior political leaders aren't willing to be good listeners, that's the problem that needs to be addressed. Not that the weather enterprise isn't going to try to work on being better at communication. We can't. We're really wired in on that. It's part of our DNA, I would say, at this point in time. But that's not enough. And no matter how much we try, it will never be enough if the person on the receiving end isn't willing to listen. That's almost like relationship advice, So right now, the relationship, I'd say, needs some serious work with the New York City leadership, and then both the mayor and the governor of New York. There's something going on there where they feel very comfortable. And we touched upon this earlier too. I wanted to say something, but then we moved on. But just this whole idea. I mean, again, the Weather Service has, Weather Ready Nation. They have Storm Ready. The behavior of the senior political leaders, in New York is the antithesis of that. Basically they're sowing mistrust with the National Weather Service forecasts and weather forecasting in general. They're sowing discord and distrust when one of the key messages, of Weather Ready Nation, Storm Ready for the National Weather Service at least, is to have your trusted weather source, to know to have your information and then know what action you should take based on that. When the mayor makes these comments as these experts, within minutes, what the experts told us was completely wrong, that does no good. That there's if he wants to think that, that's fine. If he wants to say that on a conference call with the MIC of the New York City office, or with in some type of group setting event, but to say that publicly, it just it hurts the entire weather enterprise. It's hurtful toward. If he was referring to the National Weather Service forecast, it's hurtful certainly directly toward them, but it's hurtful for the entire weather enterprise. It's insulting to the broadcast meteorologists in the New York City area. So it's, anyone and everyone who is involved with that, private, public, media, that's insulting to talk that way. There's no basis for that. It's, first of all, it's not accurate. It's again based on his ridiculous assumption that 6 inches of rain would fall evenly spread over 24 hours. So yeah, that has to change. How we get that to change is a whole separate issue, but that has to change.
Well, and it doesn't serve their constituents either, Gary. It might serve their political interests, but that seems to be the political playbook in this country right now anyway, about anything.
Absolutely.
As alluding to what Troy said earlier, vaccines or, climate change or elections, whatever you want to choose, that seems to be the playbook now, is just come out and say they were wrong, and ride that horse as long as you can. And that's not serving American society very well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And there's a tendency to point fingers and say it's predominant on one side of the political spectrum or another. But this is a glaring example from one side of the political spectrum of some really bad behavior and not listening and not understanding what the experts are saying. So you can find it. It ain't hard to find. You can look pretty much anywhere across the political spectrum and find it.
If
let me kind of
go ahead, Jay.
I was going to say, I was going to change the topic here a little bit and to talk about the term emergency in warnings. Gary, do you think now that, we're hearing flash flood emergencies, tornado emergencies, do you think that people are now just tuning into those and ignoring tornado warnings and flash flood warnings?
I have a concern. Of course, people say a lot of things. And I didn't get a lot of this, but there was basically, it came up on the CNBC interview, but the flash flood emergency wasn't issued till like 9:32, if I remember the time right, and the flooding was already underway, and I got a couple, replies on my tweet storm that was something along those lines. Meteorologists don't know if you were, well, you're not good at all what you do, why wasn't the flash flood emergency issued hours earlier? So, it is, I think it's something to be watchful. I mean, I've seen the Philadelphia market, they've issued this was like the first one for New York City ever in terms of flash flood emergency. It was like the second one, apparently it was the second one that the New York National Weather Service office had ever issued. They'd issued one a couple hours earlier from northern New Jersey. I know the Mount Holly office has issued flash flood emergencies. We actually, this is going way back in my tenure, the flooding was so bad during Hurricane Floyd, which was in 1999. We were getting reports of like landslides, liquefying slope, dirt, flowing off hillsides up in central New Jersey, that we actually, I don't think we used the word emergency. We did something. We added some additional language to the flash flood warning language, which wasn't allowed. We broke policy, but we did it for catastrophic flash flooding. And it wound up being one of the examples. Nothing was done with that for years and years, but then it did. I don't think it completely went away, and some other situations arose. And they actually did create a flash flood emergency. It did become a legal product for the National Weather Service based on policy. And there was actually some look back all the way to what we did with Floyd back in '99. I think if you're very judicious with it, if it's only for the worst of the worst, and that's what I've seen the Mount Holly office do in the Philadelphia area, and that seems, it draws the media's attention to just how bad it is when they do that. But yeah, there is the danger. There's a couple of people on Twitter, who it seemed to me like they didn't care about WPC's day and a half or 2 days worth of outlooks. They didn't care about the flash flood watch. They didn't care about the flash flood warning. They wanted, if it's going to be really bad, why didn't you have a flash flood emergency out sooner? So yeah, there are no, to me, the meaning is there are no silver bullets. I think it's how you use any tool in the toolbox. I think the Mount Holly office has done a good job of being very sparing. It does get the media's attention. So if you are worried about, in my opinion, it gets the broadcast media's attention. So if you are worried about, and I think it's a valid point, New Jersey's governors raised it, is that there's more media attention toward tornado warnings than flash flood warnings. If you think the flash flood threat is even worse than what the tornado threat is, overall, which I would argue it was during Ida, a flash flood emergency is a way to kind of yank the attention back to where it needs to be for where the worst of the flooding is. But it can't be overused.
And I would assume that wireless emergency alerts were pushed for both the flash flood warnings and the flash flood emergency in this case.
Yes, and for the tornado warnings too. You asked earlier, I don't think we could really answer how the broadcast media did in the New York City market. But I certainly got plenty of, there was, in my, people who were chatting with me after the tweets I put out last week, there were people saying up in the New York City area that their phone just wouldn't stop going off, that there was at least one tornado warning. I think one of the products you put up referenced it might have been in the Bronx, but then there were multiple flash flood warnings before the flash flood emergency. And so, yeah, people were saying my phone, that darn alarm went off like 3 or 4 times over like a 2-hour period. So people were getting it. And I think I'm happy to hear that. I don't know if they were really complaining. They're just kind of commenting about how much it was going off. In something like they hadn't seen it go off that much before in a particular period of time. And to me, that's helpful. Like you said, people are they're watching Netflix. They're not all watching, tuning into, CBS, NBC, ABC, or Fox on, the traditional channel. They're now getting information a lot of different ways. But almost all of them have their cell phone, or all of them. If you have Netflix, I'm going to say there's probably 100% overlap. If you have Netflix, you probably have a cell phone. If you're that technically adept, you're probably got a cell phone that's going to go berserk when there's a flash flood warning issued. So I'm happy that that's happening, in part because then that at least alerts them, and maybe they want to go back and then turn on traditional broadcast TV to see if they're covering it and see for more information. I know I've heard that from people too, that when their phone goes off, if they're by their TV, if they're at home, they'll actually turn it on when they wouldn't normally do so to watch if there's any weather coverage. So I think that works. It seemed to have worked in this event. Like I said, I got some people making comments about how much it went off. I would not say any of them complained that it went off too much. So that seemed to me overall was a good thing.
And also got to ask Gary, the Weather Service has a mouthpiece now. Used to be you have to use broadcast meteorologists. Now you've got Facebook and Twitter that the Weather Service uses. How is the social media usage from Mount Holly and from New York City from your perspective?
Yeah, again, I don't watch what they do too much on Facebook. As far as Twitter, I thought they were doing a good job, both of them. I retweeted more than with the Mount Holly office, in part because that's really, I still tend to tweet pretty close to the service area for the National Weather Service Mount Holly office. But I do talk some about the New York City area, just because so many people up in North Jersey who are part of, the Mount Holly service area either commute in or they go into New York, or they have family in New York City. It's a very short commute from up there into New York City itself. So we'll talk about New York City. And I did retweet some of New York City's Weather Service office's tweets. I think they did okay. I mean, again, I won't say I retweeted all of their tweets. Sometimes I went in to look to see if I'd missed something of theirs, and I grabbed it and sent it out again if I felt like I needed some additional to say something additional. But I think they're both using social media, as far as Twitter is concerned. They're using social media well. During that event, there was a lot of timely stuff going out. So I can't, and obviously there's other Twitter feeds that the National Weather Service has for like tornado, severe thunderstorm, and flash flood warning. Sometimes I just go into there, grab it, and retweet it just to get it out quick if that's the fastest way to do it. So overall, I'd say they did pretty well with that. So one of the things I'd say I'm reluctant to call it a gap, but one of the things I wound up doing is posting hydrographs. I do find that the weather offices the National Weather Service offices don't post a lot of hydrographs. And a lot of times I find that people really like those. I post from the flashier streams, and also the Schuylkill River, which flows through Philadelphia, hit its second highest crest on record. And when I saw them raise it into the major flooding category. And then I went and looked, and it was going to be the highest crest in over 150 years. That's a long record station in Philly. And so when I tweeted that was, and I said, this is going to be if this forecast pans out, it's going to be the highest crest in 150, just over 150 years. That tweet really took off. That had a lot of retweets and a lot of views. I mean, that really went. So one thing I would say is that I think river forecast information in this neck of the woods, particularly now that they're doing forecasts, that was again a nice change that occurred back when I was MIC. It used to be very selective regarding what points had forecasts. Now a lot of points around here have forecasts. You don't just see how fast the river's rising, you also see how high it's supposed to get and when. So there's a lot of information now in forecast hydrographs that wasn't there 15, 20 years ago. That'd be one thing I think perhaps could be sent out more. I did it because it didn't see a lot going out. And I thought that was an easy way to put out information that wouldn't be duplicative of what the Weather Service was doing. So maybe I don't even know that's a criticism. That's a comment on something I was doing that I didn't see them doing a whole lot of, but they were busy. It's choices to put out a hydrograph that the Schuylkill River is going to crest in about 24 hours, at major flood stage, or update a flash flood warning, or put out a tornado warning, get that out on Twitter. Obviously, the quicker stuff needs to go first. So,
James, did I hear that the National Weather Service in Birmingham is going to stop using Facebook for short fuse warnings? Is that what I saw come across the desk a week or so ago, but when all this was going crazy?
Yes, that's an interesting decision. And I understand their frustration, because with Facebook, no telling who's going to see the warning at what hour of the day or night.
Right.
You don't control the platform. What you see in your timeline, it's not necessarily in chronological order. It's something we all fight, and I've thought about that, but apparently, Bill, they've just cut it out on Facebook. So,
and it looks like we might have a different chat mechanism here shortly too, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's probably another thing I was going to ask Gary too about the effectiveness of National Weather Service chat. Do you know, Gary, if that thing worked? Did it break down? We'll make Troy's blood boil here by talking about IT problems. But how did NWS chat perform during this whole thing?
As far as I can tell, it went well, but I have to say that's a very general comment. I will say the weather, that was a thing that I struggled with and the office struggled with while I was still MIC. I would have to say that we did not use NWS. We tried to get it going a couple times, and then it just kind of withered rather slowly. And it appears, I've seen some very positive comments again from broadcast meteorologists over the past several years here in the Philly market, commenting on Twitter about how much how good the NWS chat was with the Mount Holly office for a particular event. So I'd say, in general, it's working quite well over the past, I'd say, probably 5 years or so. I don't know if they had any technical issues during Ida. I am aware that there have been some technical issues with NWS chat. There's been some technical issues with IT in general with the National Weather Service. It seems to ebb and flow a little bit. I know they had to put up, at least for a little while, a mirror site for the Hurricane Center with Ida. So some of that is just demand based, but some of that is a much bigger problem than that. But I didn't hear anything about NWS chat keeling over during Ida. So
I didn't either, Gary. I really didn't either, to be honest with you. It seemed like everything pretty much flowed. Even during the landfall of Ida in New Orleans, did y'all hear anything, Bill or James? It seemed like it was operating pretty well. I got on New Orleans room a couple of times. I might point out through Pigeon, not through the website. To me is a pain. I'd rather go through Pigeon, but
and not efficient. It's much more efficient if we do it that way, Troy.
Yeah,
that's exactly a good call.
Yeah.
And Gary, you were a prolific tweeter long before many MICs, even if any MICs had Twitter accounts. Did you get any heartburn from any of your superiors about that along the way?
Oh, there were some people up the food chain who did not think you should apologize for winter storm forecasts that go awry. So that would be probably the most difficult experience with that. Otherwise, no, not really. It was pretty, I think they were pretty, obviously, we didn't really have, Twitter was just sort of like getting on the radar, so to speak, with Irene. A few people were using Twitter and doing weather related stuff with Twitter, but the National Weather Service, I wasn't on Twitter yet. Or if I was just had barely started. And I didn't dawn on me to use it in real time with Irene, which was in 2011. It was the year before Sandy. But then when I saw what people were doing with it, when I realized what other people were doing with it during the event, immediately after the event, then I got much more proactive with it, with winter storms and with Sandy, starting with Sandy in 2012. So, and I retired in 2016 from the Weather Service. So yeah, from that point on until I retired, I was quite active. There was I was tweeting before the National Weather Service office in Mount Holly was tweeting, before they, had a Twitter account, and then they tweeted, and I tried to amplify and focus on the things I thought people might miss in the overall flow of information. I still feel like the best use of my time is to say, hey, you may not have noticed this, but this is what you should know. Like I said, when going back to what I was mentioning with Ida, when I saw the Mount Holly office raise the forecast for the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia, it was just, they just raised the forecast. It was there, and there was a warning out and stuff, but nowhere in there did it say this is going to be the second highest crest of record if this forecast verifies. So that was the gist of my tweet, along with the graphic, the hydrograph, the image of the forecast. And I find that's, it's sort of like, oh, you just forecast something that would be catastrophic. Let me make sure people know that. And that happened actually during one of the tornado warnings. Some people were posting some of the ADAD data in real time, and the dual pole caught the debris ball, the correlation coefficient caught, and it was you could even kind of see, on the reflectivity. So I got onto Twitter and I grabbed what someone had already tweeted, and I just retweeted it with a quote, and I said, just to make sure you understand what's going on here, there's a tornado on the ground, and it is so violent that it is lifting debris so high in the air that the radar can see it. And that's what you're actually seeing on this particular graphic. This is a tornado. And I said, I repeat, there is a tornado on the ground lifting debris so high that the Doppler radar can detect it and report it back to us. And that got quite a few retweets when I kind of laid it out, saying, this is because, that, as James mentioned earlier, you guys have dealt with some pretty hairy stuff when it comes to tornadoes, but that's, a debris ball on the radar from, for the Mount Holly office, it's kind of a novelty event. That's not something that happens too often around here. And so to be able to tell people basically in real time, show them a graphic that's maybe like no more than 10 minutes old and say, this is what you're looking at. That's a very nice use of Twitter. That to me is like, hey, this is unusual. Yeah, tornadoes are unusual, but here's a tornado with a debris ball on that we're picking up on radar now. Now we're like at the, two more standard deviations beyond unusual now for our neck of the woods.
Hey, Gary, before we take a break here, I want to, you've been out of it for 5 years, retired. Looking at it after 5 years and looking at the Weather Service in the future, where do you see the Weather Service in 10, 20 years from now? The field structure, the organization, will there be any big changes? What are your thoughts now? Where are we going here?
Yeah, that's certainly was a topic of discussion while I was still working with the National Weather Service. It turns out the field, for those who don't know, the field, well, how did the field structure for the Weather Service? You can pull out a map, if you happen to pull out a map for some reason, if you're really bored, pull out a map of the field structure of the Weather Service. It's based on, and there's offices kind of evenly spaced across the country. How is that? Why is that? And that was because back when the 88D Doppler radar was first being fielded, communications was a huge cost. And so that was the most efficient way to kind of space one of the offices close to the Doppler radar so that there wasn't an expensive communication cost. And then it was basically one office per Doppler radar with a few exceptions. And so you basically have this, so it's basically the radar range, it's basically the radar range of the Doppler radar back in the 80s defines our current field structure, which if you were drawing it from scratch, in the National Weather Service, you would never do it this way, for that reason. Comms is incredibly cheap compared to what it was back then for moving around Doppler radar data. But it turns out it's also, if I had to go visit my partners when I was at Mount Holly, no, but unless I get caught in a traffic jam, which can happen in the Northeast, no, nobody was more than about maybe a little over three and a quarter hours away from me drive time. So if you want to schedule a meeting and, plan for a couple hours, you're going to stay for lunch. It's pretty much a normal work day. You hit the road, you get up there, you have a meeting, you meet with them for a couple, 3 hours, and then you come back. It's like a 9-hour day. So it turns out the current field structure is awfully good for meeting with your partners if you want to meet face to face or do outreach events with them. And that's really been the focus of the Weather Service the last, I'd say, 10 years, has been with the whole idea, with going back to Storm Ready and Weather Ready Nation. This whole idea of knowing where your weather forecast comes from and knowing who your partners are, knowing how they use the information. And face-to-face has been an important part of that process, in terms of developing and maintaining those relationships. So as long as that remains the focus of the Weather Service, that kind of, approach, that we should have face-to-face meetings with our partners, that we should be reachable to them in terms of like physically getting together at some point. The field office structure won't change much. Now, whether the pandemic has changed that logic, obviously a lot of stuff has gone virtual. Zoom meetings, which was a phrase I don't think I even knew when I retired, is now a very common thing. So whether that will change, I don't know. It's clear that the digital forecast database sometimes suffers from all the different weather offices with their fingers in the pie, and I would tell them when my forecasters were having trouble getting collaboration well with neighboring offices, and for temperature, wind, whatever, I'd say, in kindergarten they teach you two things: share your toys and play well with others. Why are we having this problem, with much older individuals? There's some people who wanted to literally go to the mat and fight over whether the dew point was going to be 67 or 72 on day 5. And that part was a waste of time. So this, numerical blend of models now and some of the other efforts that the Weather Service has had underway for years now to basically smooth out some of the lumps in the digital forecast database. If they can do that, then they can kind of retain the current field office structure. If they're going to continue to have some serious continuity problems with the digital forecast database just because they have so many offices in it, that may wind up being a bit of a argument for altering the field structure. But inertia is a powerful thing. As long as they can keep reinventing themselves. I mean, again, the whole field office structure in the Weather Service reinvented itself from these offices are here because of communications issues with the 88D radar to, hey, this is a great way to meet with our partners. The spacing between offices is a great way to manage our partnerships. As long as they can keep that up, it may not change much at all.
And I've said this before. I really think you need to have a grasp of the people, the culture, and the geography of the territory that you serve. And for these local field offices, they get out, they meet people like you talked about. It's a 2-3 hour drive. That's the most distance you'll go, and you get to meet people. You understand their needs. You understand the microclimates that you deal with. Having one person in some centralized office in, Washington or Silver Spring that does the whole country. I don't know. I'm hoping the field structure stays intact because to me, it works pretty well. But we've got to take a quick break here. We got to do Tony Rice, his astronomy report. We're going to come back with the weather roundup, the picks of the week, and more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
You ever seen a bright streak of light racing across the sky? Well, you might just have seen a meteor. First, a bit of nomenclature from the top down. A meteoroid is a small asteroid, anything from a few microns up to a meter in diameter. A meteor Well, that's the streak of light that's emitted by that meteoroid as it enters the atmosphere. A meteorite, that's what survives that very hot fall through the atmosphere and makes it to the ground. Most don't make it that far. A fireball, well, that's a very bright meteor, brighter than Venus. You've probably seen videos either from dash cameras or video doorbells, and this seems like a rare occurrence, but it really isn't. Looking over the past week, there were 15 fireballs across the United States that were widely reported to the AMS. No, not that one, the other one, the American Meteor Society. There's one over Western North Carolina, another over Central Kentucky. There's one over Central New York State, another west of Lake Superior, one south of Boston, one went right over Utah's Great Salt Lake. There's one southwest of Houston, a pair that were visible to Maine and the Canadian Maritimes. There's one northeast of Las Vegas, another northeast of Los Angeles that was visible from Santa Barbara down to San Diego. Plus, there were 3 over several days visible to much of the Pacific Northwest. And those were just the ones that were reported. If you see one, report it. The more reports that we get, the better the estimates of that space rock's trajectory that can be made. Take note of the time, which way you were facing, and where the light began and ended. Visit amsmeteors.org and click on Report a Fireball. This will take you through step by step, and it's really easy. You click on a map to indicate which way you were facing and where the light was in the sky. Also make note of any color that you saw. This can tell us a lot about what the space rock is made up of. Iron burns light yellow, sodium is more orange, calcium is a purple, and magnesium is a bright blue. It's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
When the weather ball is red, warmer weather is ahead. When the weather ball is white, colder weather is in sight. When the weather ball is green, no change in the weather is foreseen. When colors blink by night or day, precipitation's on the way.
Haven't played our weather ball song in a long time. I was way overdue to do that. Let's do a weather roundup. Let's talk about weather happening across the country. We're doing this on the 6th of September. It is Labor Day. And Troy, you had some rain out there in South Texas, didn't you?
I've been watching that. I've been kind of backing up and looking out the window a little bit. We've had thunderstorms on the northwest side of Austin here for the last couple of hours. That's a pretty good thunderstorm south of town today. Some wind damage down around Bastrop, Texas, and also down near the weather office down in New Braunfels. Had one of our old honky tonks down there southeast of San Marcos had part of the roof blown off today. This evening, some showers and thunderstorms out northwest toward Leander in areas like that. Our friends in Lago Vista, which is out north of Lake Travis, north side of Austin, they're down to 68 degrees right now with a thunderstorm. They've had better than a half inch of rain. So pretty good showers and thunderstorms. We were still at 100 today out at Camp Mabry, which is the National Weather Service in-city ASOS climate site. Out at Bergstrom, the high today, James, was about 98.
All right, Gary, it's pretty quiet up there in your neck of the woods. What's happening in Philadelphia, PA?
Yeah, no, it's still, it's still cleanup going on from Ida, and the weather. We had some rain that came in yesterday, later in the day, but it cleared out this morning. And so today wound up being another really good day, and the temperatures were relatively mild, a little below normal for this time of year. We were just in the low 80s. And that's kind of what's going to happen tomorrow too. So it's mostly sunny skies and lows in the low 60s, highs in the low 80s. Next chance of rain is coming up on Wednesday, and then after that it looks kind of nice again. So we just got a front coming through. So a much quieter week than last week, and I think this entire region could use it. So that's kind of a nice break.
Indeed. Larry, a major hurricane, will stay in the Atlantic, maybe brushing the Canadian Maritimes, and a little feature in the Gulf of Mexico. You always have to watch this time of the year, but It looks like it will probably not get its act together until maybe it crosses over into the Atlantic in about 4 days or so. But we'll keep an eye on that. But it looks like it probably won't develop in the Gulf. There has been some upwelling, by the way, after Ida. The SSTs have come down. Still supportive of tropical storm formation, but they're not as extreme as they were a couple of weeks ago. And Bill Murray, Birmingham, Alabama, I think we're going to be in the 50s Friday morning. I'm excited. Very excited.
I think we're going to have a very nice weekend around here. I think it's going to be starting really starting Thursday and all the way into the weekend. So it'll be very nice. So got a little shower this morning. I think that might be the last one I get for a while. It was perfect for going out and do a little yard work about 8:30 this morning. It wasn't bad at all.
I've got to get down to Tuscaloosa. It's like a University of Alabama home game Saturday. And Troy, you kind of live in that same world. They have changed the stadium in Tuscaloosa. And I did everything off site last year because of COVID. I was not in the building, but I'm back, and they put these huge screens, these high resolution jumbotron screens up there. And they pretty much, it's blocked my little spot where I've always worked for all these years. So I got to go case the joint. But as Bill said, I think the weather's going to be fine. Alabama, who do they play, Bill? The Culinary Institute of Indiana, or East Aboga Community College?
That's about what it is. Yeah,
I'll take
the over-under.
Tell you something else too, James. Talked to Kevin Clazel this week, of course, up at OU. And here at UT, we had done a lot of work where I worked in the Emergency Operations Center here for our ball games. We, of course, had finished up the doming, really, of the south end of the end zone. And I talked to Kevin, and he kind of cautioned me that something they had noticed up at OU, and that was when they did that, it kind of stopped the wind flow from being as much as it had been, since our predominant winds are from the south. And even with a very marginal heat index at the University of Texas game a couple of days ago, we were slammed with heat-related calls. And there's some feeling, and Kevin was talking to me about it, that, as you dome the stadiums up more, you at least closer to ground level, you obviously are going to cause a more chaotic wind flow. And who's to say that's not going to block a little of it? So,
yep. All right. So Bill, you say you got some breaking news here? Do we?
Bring the breaking news jingle. We've got some very important news.
We interrupt this program for a CBS Radio Net Alert Bulletin.
Well, if you tuned in tonight to hear Josh Bullock talking about his documentary, God in the Tornado, we'll reschedule him, but I'm glad we had all this time with Gary. Gary, thank you for being here. We never have trouble filling an hour and a half when we've got Gary on, that's for sure. And we always love that. But James, we have a new panelist to announce.
All right.
Starting September 20th, Dr. Neil Jacobs, the former Undersecretary of NOAA, will join us as permanent panelist, which is really exciting news. He's thrilled and very flattered that we asked him, but we were the ones who were really flattered. I didn't tell him that, but that he would spend his Monday nights with us is really an honor. So
I get worried when Bill announces that. I'm afraid he'll announce and ask you to put the news bulletin that Troy's out. So,
that's right. Yeah. Span and Kimmel are out. Yeah. Neil Jacobs is in.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be a problem anytime soon. But I did like Tony's email about he's actually gotten complaints about no warning for meteors. So if we think we get hot and bothered when we hear that. Think about how an astronomer must feel.
Yep.
And so that's pretty interesting. But I also wanted to mention about Jason Simpson retiring in Huntsville, James. That's interesting. And,
Jason,
your protege.
One of my creations. I first met Jason when he was, I want to say, in middle school in Holly Pond, Alabama. And he, of course, kept up with him through high school. He went to college in Starkville, finished at Mississippi State, interned here, would go on to work in Meridian, Mississippi, was in Missouri for a while, and we hired him. And he was with me during the super outbreak of 2011. I would not want anybody else in this room with me but him. He was the best. He was just outstanding that day. And Jason has been up in Huntsville, Alabama, as the chief meteorologist for the CBS channel for 10 years, and he's kind of retiring from television. It's a decision that everybody has to make. This is hard. Let me tell you what, Troy, you remember, we're old enough to remember the old days. We'd worry about being on television at 6 and 10 o'clock, and that was it. I mean,
exactly.
What did we do with all of our time back then?
We went out.
I think we actually forecast with our time.
Yeah.
And what I was going to tell you, I mean, I'm being serious about that. And I have people that are on TV that tell me that. And they say, we've got to do the Twitter. We got to do all this, Gary. We got to do all that. And and I'd love to have a little time to forecast. I've heard people tell me that before,
Right. And let me tell you what, it is hard. I mean, finding the time to do analytical thinking and analysis and forecasting, it is so hard now because, again, in my case, I sleep 3 hours a night, 1 to 4 a.m. And that's when the weather's good during the week, which is not healthy. Nope. And under the pressure of all the platforms you have to maintain, and the trolls and the haters and the know-it-alls and the toxic comments and the pure vitriol that you deal with, it wears on you. It beats you down. It beats you down to a pulp. And, Jason has a child with a medical issue. It's complicated. And he just thinks that getting away from television is going to allow him to do better for his family. And I respect that. Family always has to come first. And I've seen a lot of folks get out of the business just because it's just too much. There's absolutely too much. It is not a good place for your mental health. And even some old crusty guy like me that's been doing this forever, there are days where you're thinking, goodness gracious. But anyway, so yeah, Jason is leaving television here, but he was a good one. I mean, I am a better man because I worked with Jason Simpson. So, and you want to do a quick email, Bill, before we do picks of the week?
Yeah, I thought we needed to.
Well, hang on, I got to play my song here.
Oh yeah, you do.
I got to play my song. We're going to read an email, then we got to have my song.
Letters, we get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
And I could never fill Aubrey's shoes for the email segment, but I'll try it tonight. This is from Devin Greeny. I think he's in Memphis. He says, does Ida hold the record for deaths by an inland hurricane? And I think the answer to that is probably clearly no. Camille, unless the death toll goes up by a couple of magnitudes here. Camille killed several in Virginia back in 1969, but he says that was nothing compared to what Ida did 1,000 miles inland. But I think that's probably not really true. If you go back and look at Camille, the flooding in Virginia, as that storm was moving up the East Coast was phenomenal. Some of the rainfall rates in the Virginia mountains were amazing, upwards of 20 inches. So any comparisons there, Gary, you want to throw out to Agnes or Camille or anything like that?
Yeah, I haven't looked at, specific numbers, but Agnes is sort of the, flood of notoriety here that, people would compare, potentially compare Ida to. For a lot of spots, Agnes hits in different areas. So there's many spots in the in northern northeast Pennsylvania that Agnes was catastrophic, and Ida did not produce anywhere near the impact. So I don't have a really good answer to the question. I just I'll leave it at that.
It will definitely be a storm that will go down in the history books, though, for sure. And that's the email roundup. If you have anything that you want to send us, email at weatherbrains.com. I love those guest suggestions. We get some of our best guest suggestions right off of that email account. So please send if you have any contact information. That's always a huge help, but we'd just love to hear from you. And James, I thought your tweet about Lindsey Gow with WTOC was interesting. Want to comment on that?
Well, it's not really weather related. I just hate it when I see young people that are in television just get treated so horribly. And I don't know who she works for at some station. I want to say in Savannah, but they put her in the Georgia Clemson game, a live shot. In Troy, now everybody's a one-man band. You used to have a 3-man crew back in the old days. Now it's your one-man band. You set up your camera on a tripod. You step out there in front of it. There's nobody running the camera. And then this parade of horrible people came up and just harassed her and put their hands on her. And obviously most of these people were drunk. And number one, the station should not have done that. I mean, that she should not have been at that site doing the weather there. That anybody knows that's trouble. And I don't know whose decision that was, but whoever, that was a bad decision. But then
Amen.
She had to deal with all these just horrible people, just horrible people. And that is part of the business. I understand that, but it's especially hard for a young woman in a situation like that. If it was me, I'm from Butler County, Alabama. I can still open up a can of if I need to. I mean, but
come on over.
But that is, it's just a horrible, I just hate to see that, So anyway, it was just a interesting tweet here, but let's morph on here to the Picks of the week, where we're going to share something that is really exciting, that is weather related. And my pick is coming off the WPC site, the Weather Prediction Center, where they've got this really interesting archive of tropical cyclone rainfall. And everybody's talking about, well, this ain't ever happened before here. This has never happened before here. Well, if you really want to know if it's happened before here, then you can go back and search per storm, per year, per state, per county. It's a fascinating database. Yep. And we've had a long, long history of these horrific Gulf of Mexico hurricanes that made landfall, producing huge flooding up in the Northeast, and the storms like a Floyd that came in on the Atlantic coast side. So, and again, I just like data. I'm a numbers guy. So that's my pick of the week. Troy, what you got for us?
Well, I've got one, and Gary may know a little more about this, although I think this has probably come about pretty recently. But if you haven't ever used the National Weather Service, the Hazards and Weather Viewer, this is actually something that is being hosted at this point anyway by Western Region headquarters. What I've done, and if Bill, we get both of these links posted, folks, this thing is so easy to set up and view what you want to view. This viewer has warnings, watches, hydrologic, short fuse warnings, watches, surface weather observations, RAWS observations. And what I've done is given the link to the system, but at the very top of it, you'll see something called bookmark. So you can come down and you can pick out, like I have in Central Texas, I want to see observations and radar, and you can bookmark that and hold it. And you can set up your own pages within that viewer, essentially for your own use, that you can put on your web page or wherever. And it's a great site. Kudos to that. As much hell as I give the Weather Service on IT issues and everything else, there are a lot of creative men and women out there that have come up with this. And that Hazards and Weather Viewer is one of the best sites they've come up with in a long time.
And did that come about? Is that like a follow up to the old EDD, which I know is still out there?
I think it's still out there, but I don't see experimental on this.
No,
so it
looks like a great looking product.
No, it isn't. And if you go to my link, which ends up being very long because I bookmarked it, but if you go that, you see what I'm talking about tonight with the showers and thunderstorms around South Central Texas that we've seen, and the radar and the observations. I've even got it where you can hover over the observations and see the raw METAR data. So it's really neat site.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest picks we've had in a while. This is like really outstanding. I mean, this is
Troy,
a time suck right here. I mean,
you're like the Ted Williams of picks of the week, I think.
No. That's not necessarily. Yeah. I'll go back. This is not Daryl's invention, but this reminds me a lot of what Daryl does, up at Iowa State. Yep.
All right, Gary. So the pressure's on. Give us something good we don't know. What's your pick of the week?
Well, I'm going to be a little self-serving here. So I mentioned earlier that I'm doing, weather forecasts. I was talking about how I was doing something on Monday last week for the city of Philadelphia for the forecast for Tuesday. So I'm just going to talk. It's on Twitter. It's called Currently. It's the word currently with the @ symbol. On the website is currentlyhq.com. That's who I put together a little forecast for. They've got a bunch of cities that you do that for, and there's stuff that's free. And if you want to pay a little money, there's more stuff. But the thing the angle here that the reason why I mentioned it, given what happened last week, is you get a lot of stuff, not just about weather, but it's also got a lot of information about climate and climate change. And communities that tend to be traditionally underserved by weather and by forecasting. So, again, I'll make kind of a judgment call, and I haven't really looked at the data, but, we lost a lot of people last week from flooding, and I'm willing to bet that not very few, if any of them, were millionaires. The people, particularly with flooding deaths, they sit, toward the lower end of the economic spectrum. They're in more vulnerable areas. They're more vulnerable. I can be a little more understanding with them, not being aware of what the, weather forecasts and warnings were. So these are some of the groups I think we have to try to get better at reaching out to. And I think every day they put out something, tagged on to say my forecast for the city of Philadelphia. There'll be some other information, not necessarily tied to Philly. It can be anywhere in the country. or even some international stuff. But again, it's currently on Twitter, just the word currently, and then currentlyyhq.com is the website. Check it out. If nothing else, you can sign up and get, I'm limited to 100 words. I occasionally go over, but just 100 words of wisdom from me on the next day's forecast. So that's, if nothing else, you can sign up for something like that for free.
Awesome.
Something
And again, all of
that
these
weather disasters tend to do is point out inequality and inequity, don't they, Gary?
Yes, they do. I mean, particularly if you're listening and looking for it, you realize what's going on.
Yep.
and all these links will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com. All right, Dr. Murray, what you got for us?
Yeah, that's one link that won't be up on the WeatherBrains website because I'm going to take the foghorn just because I like to hear the sound of it.
What?
But I will point out that next week on Monday night we'll be talking about the National Weather Service in the cloud because Gary was talking about technology issues. We'll be on here with Michelle Manelli and Andrea Bleistein from the Weather Service. And then Kim's got the show on the 20th talking about what's brewing in radar. And then Jen has one of our ultimate gets. She's like 3 for 3 in these ultimate gets. We could never get Neil Frank. And Neil Frank is scheduled for Monday, September 27th. But don't say anything, Gary, because we don't want him to back out at the last moment. Sure.
Yeah. If he actually watches this show, he'll back out in a heartbeat. We know that. So
last week.
All right. So, Gary, thanks a lot for anything else you need to plug here, because we got to wrap it up. You were a great guest as always. Any other plugs? Go for it. Go.
No, that was, I think I appreciate all the time. You guys gave me a lot of time to talk. I appreciate it. No, I think I'm good.
Okay, Gary. Well, listen, you're the greatest. Yeah, thanks. And listen, if you want to catch us live, we're typically on the air at 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern Mondays. We're an hour earlier this week. Live.bigbrainsmedia.com. But most of you listen to the audio version, and it's on your favorite podcast app. And you want to send us an email, that email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. And the show notes, all the picks of the week, all the things we talked about, weatherbrains.com as well. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening and watching. Have a great week, and God bless.
We've missed you doing the close, James. It's nice when you get to do it.
Yeah. It's like the old days.
Are we ready to go to a
Gary.
7 o'clock show, do you think? Or are we getting close on that?
I don't care. I'm good here. I mean, it doesn't matter to me.
I like the 7 o'clock.
Me too. I'll ask around one more time. Just make sure.
Yeah. Gary,
thanks, Gary. You're the greatest.
Yeah, thanks.